So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a nice crowd joining. My name is Matan, Katzman, and here with me is Omri, Attar. We're both from from My Truth, an organization that educates about what's going on in Israel and specifically in the IDF. We, in the past few days, felt that what we've seen going on in Israel and around the world in terms of international media and what's going on social media didn't really reflect our own experience as combat officers in the IDF and what we've seen and what we see as Israelis. So we decided to open up this event for Q&A so that you guys can ask us questions which we will respond to. Currently, everyone's on mute just for sake of order, but we will soon open up to questions from you guys. Just to start a little bit about who we are and why we're here today. As mentioned, my name is Matan. I'm 34 years old. I've been serving in and out the Gaza Strip since 2005. I've been an officer in the unit called Givati, which specializes most of the time in and around Gaza. In 2005, I took part in the disengagement from Gaza as a young soldier. And I since then served in countless operations in the Gaza Strip. The last one being the war in 2014, Operation Protective Edge. About 1 year after Protective Edge, me and several friends, we felt that the way the IDF fought in the 2014 war didn't portray our own experiences. So we decided to speak up and share our own experiences from the IDF. And that's why we founded My Truth. Here with me today is Omri Attar, who actually also served in a similar unit that I served in, also in Givati, and Omri will also introduce himself. I actually met Omri during the Army, but since then we also continued our work together in My Truth. So we set up today's event just because we thought that there are enough people that want to hear out and listen to what's going on and learn more. And I think we did get some questions up front that we thought we would just start answering to. But given there's a very nice crowd that joined us, what I would suggest is if someone would want to either by raise or...
Matan, you're on mute for some reason.
Sorry. So either by raise of hands or if you want to submit questions through the messaging of the Zoom app, we can just start and go about this and start answering questions. So if someone, either by raise of hands, we can, let me look. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Anyone want to ask a question? Do you want to submit a question, maybe possibly by chat? Okay. So I don't see any questions yet. So I think we'll start, Omri, with one of our pre-planned questions.
Yeah. Why not?
Okay. Great. That sounds good. I think one of the biggest questions we got is what changed? What's different from what's going on now, and what is happening since the last Gaza war? And I think there are several big changes in what we're seeing both on the Israeli side and both on the Gaza side. The most obvious difference between the two operations, I think, is an outcome of the fact that for the past several years, Israel has built an underground wall. Israel is spending over $1 billion, billions of shekels, to build an underground smart wall that penetrates through the ground and goes down to sea level, with the goal of detecting and stopping Hamas terror tunnels that penetrated into Israel. In the last Gaza war, there were several attacks into Israel by Hamas, where they, went under the land fence that's on the ground level, and they were attacking Israelis on the Israeli side of the border. And this is what also prompted Israel's ground operation in the 2014 war, which, the fact that ground soldiers had to enter Gaza was a very big deal, and that was a big part of the difference from now. Now we do not see ground forces entering Gaza, in 2014 I was stationed in a place called Sufa, which was one of those spots where the Hamas tunnels penetrated Israel. And thankfully now the situation is that Israel was able to stop this. Now, what this means is Hamas was trying to look for other ways to attack Israel. They're also looking for their own military tactical successes. So they've launched much more rockets into Israel by 100%. It's a huge increase in rocket fire into Israel, which is causing a lot of fear and destruction in Israel. They're also trying to, attack Israel with drones. They're trying to attack through sea. They're trying to find other ways to attack Israel because of this, underground wall. And I think this is the biggest difference in terms of the military side of this operation in Gaza, which Israel, the IDF especially, was able to confine from the air. Omri, would you like to add to that?
Yes, and we also have some questions already in the chat and in the private box, so thank you guys. First of all, I want also on my behalf also to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's not an easy day, not at all, and not only in Israel, but also for the Jewish people around the world. So we appreciate your time and the fact you are joining us tonight or this evening. I want to answer maybe in a short answer, and then we can address the other questions because I think it's all connected or interconnected. But basically, yes. Unfortunately, as our Prime Minister once wrote in his book, there is nothing new under the sun. And Hamas is not a new organization. And its terror ways, or in a general terror approach, has not changed in the past 20 years, unfortunately to say. Some people connect the dots between the current operation to Protective Edge in 2014, or Pillar of Cloud in 2012, or Cast Leg in 2008 or 2009, but there's no similar points to discuss. Yes, we can use statistics of killing count. We can use statistic of rockets fired, but we also can check the statistic of successes, military successes or Hamas successes. And right now we're at a position that I think that Israel is being pushed to basically apologize for the lack of success of Hamas. So Israel as an army obviously is one of the biggest in the world, but definitely the strongest in the area. And we're being very effective. We're doing a lot not to harm collateral damage or civilians, and we're trying to do it the best we can. And obviously, if you see some videos from press within the Gaza Strip, you can see from time to time a videographer or a journalist standing one building or one block beside of a building that's been coming down from a bomb from the sky. So that's something to take into account. And obviously, we had a lot of controversial activities, or in the eyes of the world, being attacked for bombing the AP building, which we're going to discuss. There's a few questions on that. We will address it momentarily. But I think we need to remember there's nothing new. In 2014, when the Israeli government decided to go to attack the cross-border attack tunnels that Hamas used, by the way, operationally used, we need to remember, there's few tunnels until today. They're not activated because the IDF and the Israeli government blocked them, but cross-border tunnels that we saw up north, like Hezbollah used, we saw it down south by Hamas. And we need to remember, already in 2004 and 2005, inside Gush Katif, Hamas used attack tunnels. So that was not new at all. And in 2006, the assailants that kidnapped Gilad Shalit in June 2006 were terrorists that came out from an attack tunnel. So that was not new. We need also to remember. And the rockets or the mortar bombs that being fired at Israeli settlements, by the way, mostly Israeli settlements and Israeli civilians, are also not new. Unfortunately, we mentioned a few days ago the first Qassam that was fired towards Gush Katif and the area surrounding Gaza. We celebrated, I'm saying quote not quote, 20 years for the first Qassam. So that's also much before the disembarkment from the Gush Katif, and of course much before the big operations within the Gaza Strip. So that's something to mention. The second point I want to mention, Matan, with your permission, it's the linkage that we need to address. I see also some questions about it, and thank you, by the way, for the people who are sending those also in private. We will address all of them, I promise. So the linkage right now is very problematic. Let me just explain. 2014, the protective edge operation in Gaza, some people link it towards the three young Jewish Israelis that were kidnapped, shot and killed, and then hidden in the West Bank. And the linkage there was artificial because Hamas started to shoot rockets towards Israeli because he wanted to seize the momentum and try to use his attack tunnels in that kind of period of time. But we need to remember the linkage there was artificial. And that's also the linkage that the Hamas terror organizations and other people, especially from the international arena, is trying to do. So we need to remember, yes, Sheikh Jarrah issue happened a few weeks ago. Then we saw the riots, or I would say the fighting between Jews and Arabs within Israeli, within the Israeli country. We saw it up north in Akko, but we saw it also next to Tel Aviv in Lod, and we saw it in other places as well, like Bat Yam, when rioters from the Jewish community, but also from the Arab community, came to fight basically, and we saw some casualties as well from both ends, by the way. So, and then outside of the blue, or not outside of the blue, we'll talk about it in a minute, Hamas started to fire rockets towards Israel. Yes, we're using the Iron Dome. Yes, there is lack of success in Hamas, but we need to remember, Israel, I'm not here to be a politician and to tell you Israel has the right to defend itself. Of course there is, but I'm just saying that the linkage, we need to remember, is very artificial, and it's not working on our behalf at all. The internal conflict between Arabs and Jews, not talking about the Arab-Israeli Jews, I'm talking within the country of Israel, the Arab-Jewish conflict in Israel is a long-term conflict that needs to be solved socially, but also policy-wise. That's something to remember. The Sheikh Jarrah issue, it's a big issue. It's a legal issue that's been dealt within Israeli courts, the Supreme Courts, for the last 30 years. We can debate about the timing or not, but that's something irrelevant to the security of Israel, but also for the security of our people. And then there's the third matter of what's going on right now in Gaza. Unfortunately, from time to time, I'm mentioning, sorry, there's a beep here that I need to close, sorry. From time to time, I'm doing lectures around the country of Israel. I'm always asking, between 2005, which was the disengagement from the Gush Katif, and 2008, we talked about number of operations, but right now I just numbered the 4 recent operations, which right now the Guardian of the Wall, Protective Edge, This Is 2, Pillar of Cloud, and Cast Lab. In 11 years, we had to go with, I'm not talking about a round of firing at each other. I'm talking about a named operation of the IDF, which is a vast operation, enormous one, not only by Air Force, but a lot of units are taken involved. 4 operations in almost 12 years, from 2008, late 2008. But between the disengagement from August 2005 until Katzman, in 3 years, when I'm asking this number, someone of you know how many operations we did within the Gaza Strip? I'm talking outside of Gush Katif. We weren't in Gush Katif anymore. It was across border operations. The number is over 40. So since Katzman until now, we did 4 big operations comparing to over 40 in 3 years after the disengagement. So we need to understand it's nothing new under the sun. We need to understand that Hamas, because of his lack of success operationally, tactically, is using another strategical weapon, which is rockets, towards the center of Israel, the heart of Israel, and the area around the Gaza. And you need to listen carefully when I'm saying it, because you need to take it into account before you're asking your questions about the linkage between those 3. So if I answer several questions, I'm happy. Matan, and I think we can take a few more questions because there's a lot of going on right now in the chat, but also on private channels.
Yeah, so another question we received is about the destruction in Gaza that we're seeing on the news and in social media. So here's the thing. Just to generally understand, for those who are less familiar with who are the people that Israel is dealing with in Gaza right now. Okay, so there are 2 main general terrorist organizations that control Gaza. The main obviously is Hamas, who after Israel left Gaza in 2005, overthrew the Fatah and took over Hamas and controls the Gaza Strip. Okay, saying that a very large terrorist organization in Gaza is Islamic Jihad. Okay, it has its own military wing separated from Hamas, but they do a lot of the work together. They're very much coordinated. They have joint meetings. Their hierarchy is different, but in many ways, their aim to shoot at Israel and kill Israelis is very much the same. Now, for the past, mainly since 2014, but also before that, we've also seen this on the news now. Hamas is building an insane tunnel infrastructure inside Gaza. It's mainly tunnels, but it's also bunkers that are spanned throughout the Gaza Strip. They span through for more than hundreds of kilometers. It's almost unfathomable. It's really crazy how long these tunnels are. And these are mainly defense tunnels that Hamas and Islamic Jihad use to defend themselves underground. They build these bunkers underground. And what most people unfortunately don't understand is that the complete majority, almost 90-something% of this infrastructure is built under residential neighborhoods, in residential homes, where people live their lives, but everything is happening inside their neighborhoods under the ground, okay? Now, when the second a war or some kind of, escalation happens with Israel, the entire leadership of Hamas and Islamic Jihad instantly go down into their bunkers. It is known that Hamas leadership specifically sits in bunkers under Shifa Hospital, which is the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip. They sit there in their bunkers, and they sit there so far under the ground that no bomb can hit them. Okay, so basically, while the Palestinians in Gaza are trying to live their lives, Hamas shoots at Israel. The entire Hamas leadership is underground. Okay, they start sending out their soldiers to start shooting in Israel, and then Israel is in a situation where it has to stop this. And you know, I'm speaking as an officer in the army from a military standpoint. This is incredibly hard to target these people in the first place. It's hard to find them. It's hard to locate them. And then when you look at this further, it is so difficult to destroy this infrastructure, this terror infrastructure, which is underground, where people are, where the Hamas terrorists are hiding inside when it's under residential buildings. And, you know, although the IDF is going through extreme measures to not hit civilians and try to pinpoint, you know, and target only the terrorists and their infrastructure and, you know, their operational hideouts and where they're conducting their business. Unfortunately, because people live there, people get hurt. People that aren't involved, who don't shoot at Israel, they're civilians, but because Hamas hides under them, they get hurt. So not just talking about the people that are hurt, a lot of civilian infrastructure gets destroyed. And this is a lot of the destruction we're seeing. Now, I've seen some, I don't know if any of you have seen some pictures coming out from Gaza in the last few days. There was something that was really unbelievable to me. The people in Gaza are so unbelievably, I'll say this differently, they have so much faith in the precision striking of the IDF.
Hey, I'm sorry, are you guys taking questions?
Yes.
I just have one question, my apologies. Just to bring back up what's going on.
1 second, I'll finish my answer and I'll be glad to answer this. I don't know who this is, but I'll be glad to answer. Okay? What's your name?
Shalom.
Shalom, I'll answer this. Okay. I've been looking at videos coming out of Gaza, and what was unbelievable to me is that people were standing possibly 100 meters from buildings that the IDF said that they're going to strike. And they were literally just standing there and taking photos of the building, meaning they had so much faith that the IDF will, you know, strike only buildings that they said that they were strike, that they evacuated civilians from. They had so much faith that they were just standing there and taking pictures of this. Now, in any other, you know, normal scenario, probably by any other army in the world, where there wouldn't be these like warnings and advanced notices, this wouldn't happen. This is something I noticed. Yes, Shalom, I understand you want to ask a question. I don't see you here, but you can go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so just going back to what you were saying about Gaza, just a statement that I've heard is that there's a blockade stopping anyone from coming into Gaza, leaving Gaza, checkpoints and whatnot. And I know, being an IDF soldier, one of the parts I've seen multiple videos of IDF soldiers speaking out, stating that none of their hands are clean because a regular day would be breaking into a civilian's home at 5 a.m., waking them up and taking over their homes. And basically, I just want to know the truth to why there's the blockade and why that would be considered a daily activity for Israeli soldiers.
Okay, so first of all, that's not the situation at all. I don't know if you heard that kind of statements, then they're obviously not true. But Gaza is not Israel. Gaza has its own government, Hamas government, and Israel has every right to defend itself and not allow arms that are meant to.
But that's what I feel like that's the same thing that you guys.
I'm sorry. I'm answering your question. I'm answering your question. Okay. And the situation is that Israel, okay, is defending itself because everything that's going into Gaza, Hamas uses to fire at Israel. Now, I want to share with you a crazy situation that happened yesterday. I was driving down south, and when I was driving down south, there were dozens of huge trucks right near the Gaza border, trying to going towards Kerem Shalom crossing to provide humanitarian aid that was supposed to enter into Gaza. Now, 2 hours later, I heard on the news that Hamas was shooting at this crossing where Israel was providing humanitarian aid trucks that were bringing in food and gasoline into Gaza, and Hamas shot at and injured 3 soldiers. So Israel was risking its own soldiers while Hamas was shooting at the humanitarian aid that Israel was allowing into Gaza, which is practically insane. Not to mention that Gaza has other borders. Gaza has a border with Egypt. I think you can ask the Egyptian government why it does not allow, Hamas or other Palestinian people out of Gaza. And the reason is because they export terror into Sinai, into Egypt. So I think also Egypt and Israel has a right for self-defense not to allow anyone who wants to destroy it and enter into Israel. So this is a very important part. And not to mention that what you said, that Israelis enter into homes of people, I think you're confusing the West Bank and Gaza, okay? Which are 2 different places governed by 2 different, authorities. So I wouldn't confuse the 2, but thank you for your question, okay? And I hope that answered.
June, do you want to ask a question up front or you want me to read your question?
I feel like that wasn't really answering my question.
Shalom, thank you very much. We need to move
forward.
Keeps
going
this
back
is not
on
a debate.
I understand, Shalom, but yeah. I think
it's not. But you guys are bullshitting. You're liars. You hear it?
Shalom. We let you answer.
You hear it in your voice.
Your question. So please let's move forward.
June, you want to ask a question, or you want?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Omri. Thank you. Would you mind if I don't come on video? Just a quick question. Maybe I didn't articulate it properly in my text, but this clashes with the Hamas has been happening right from the beginning, 2007, when they took over the Gaza, etc. Now, my only question is...
Can you talk a little bit slower? I'm sorry, it's hard for me.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Matan, I'm saying that the clash with the Hamas specifically has been happening almost every few years, with the gaps in the middle, ever since they took over in 2007, after from the Fatah. My question is, let's hope not, but if this current situation also ends in just yet another ceasefire, leaving other things in place, then it leaves a great possibility of yet another exchange of fire, rocket firing, etc. What would the minimum that the Israeli government, that the IDF would accept, which would make sure that either there is some kind of a force inside Gaza, an international force, or some kind of a monitoring mechanism to make sure that these rockets are not ever used and created again?
Omri, do you want to address this?
Yes, and also thank you specifically, Arjun, for joining us from far India. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your presence with us. That's a great question, by the way. I also read it, and what kind of terms the ceasefire will change the reality or the future, the upcoming future. It's a difficult question to answer because we need also to remember that our position, Matan and I, are basically our combat ranked officers. So we are not policymakers, but I can tell you from our opinion or from my specific point of view, it will be difficult to state something like that right now. There's, my joke about not a joke for a laugh, but my kind of joke in the recent days that the international critics against Israel came a little bit late this time. It became a little bit late this time because I think Israel did a lot of work, by the way, together with your great country, but together with the US and other European countries that kind of endorsed Israel activities within or against the Hamas and within the Gaza Strip. And we need to remember that this endorsement is crucially important before going out to operations. Unfortunately, Israel can decide when to go to operation in any days because it is the strongest player in the region, in the area. But every time since 2007, and you mentioned, by the way, that Hamas took over, but we need to remember it was a military coup that Hamas killed Fatah families, that Israel, by the way, fled them from the areas border cross to the West Bank. So Israel was familiar with that Hamas, and when we're talking about elections or democratic values within the Gaza Strip, we need also to remember that Hamas is in control because they're holding the strongest military power there. So that's something to mention out there. And if there's a change in ceasefire right now, we know there's a few Israeli, also some unfortunately deceased combat soldiers that was kidnapped after they died in an Operation Protective Edge in 2014. But there's also a few Israeli civilians, 2 Israeli civilians that been captured by Hamas. And if you ask me, one of the main goals for the Israeli government before deciding the ceasefire is to kind of to zero down I would say to bring back the soldiers back to Israeli grave for their families, but also to understand exactly where we're going from now. Israel controlling the borders, I would say like the maritime border, of course, but also the borders against Israel, but also from Rafah, that Egypt is being very, very highly involved. And we need to understand exactly what Hamas is trying to achieve, not against Israel, but to their own people in Gaza. The West Bank government, which is the PLO, led by Abu Mazen, is not relevant for the Gazan people, unfortunately to say. And we need to understand exactly what Hamas wants to achieve when they attack Israeli civilians or killing Israeli soldiers or bombarding Israel with over 3,250 rockets in the past 10 days, what they want to achieve. Obviously, this reality cannot go on. And I'm not talking about people running to shelters. I have, 2 small kids. My wife is pregnant. She's pregnant. Matan has 3 kids. And I guess all of you from Israel has small kids here need to run to a shelter in the middle of the night because they bombarded the entire area from the Gaza Strip up to over 150 kilometers up north. They needed to sleep in shelters. And I can't even imagine about the young parents in Gaza with their young kids where they have to stay right now. So this reality obviously cannot continue. And if you ask me about the ceasefire agreement and what will change, I don't know who to answer, but I can tell you that we do hope, as Israelis and as Israeli combat officer, I can tell you that we do hope that this conflict or ongoing conflict that is coming to arise every now and then needs to stop. Also for the Gazan people and also for the Israel people.
I'd also like to add to that. Look, unfortunately, I wish this wasn't the case, but the ceasefire will last as long as Hamas decided it lasts, not Israel. Even if I wish this wasn't the case, okay? Hamas, I don't think really cares about its own people. It has its own objectives, its own ideology, and when they'll decide to shoot again, they'll shoot again. Now, I hope, and I think this is the main goal of this operation, is to make that day for them to decide that they want to shoot again at Israeli civilians as far away as possible. And I think this is the goal in this operation, okay? When Israel destroys infrastructure, it takes them longer time to destroy infrastructure. When Israel destroys rockets, it takes them longer to destroy rockets. When Israel kills Hamas scientists and cyber experts and project managers that create their weapons, it takes Hamas more time to get the capabilities to shoot at Israel. So, this is also kind of to one of the questions we got. We got a question: what sort of a ceasefire would Israel accept? Okay, so I think we should accept a ceasefire that will put the next round, the next conflict, the next escalation as far as possible. I think that's the what's going on.
Yes.
Sorry. Omri, just one follow-up on this is that they've also taken advantage, if I can understand this correctly, of the complete silence until just a couple of days ago from the Fatah, because they are now since the conflict, since when it started with the court cases, etc., and then leading on to the Temple Mount clashes, etc., there was no much of a word from Fatah, from the PLO, from the authority, from the Palestinian Authority. By making an action in favor of what they call on favor of the Palestinian civilians or whatever in East Jerusalem, they have also made a political statement that they are making their move in favor of the civilians while the Fatah has been quiet comparatively. So they, as if they are the leaders versus the Fatah.
This is a very interesting thought. You know, I heard a lot of voices coming from Fatah, Palestinians in the West Bank, that the reason Hamas was raising its head now and basically deciding to start going violent, starting with TikTok violent. There were a lot of stabbings and shootings, or Palestinians in the West Bank hitting Israelis and posting this on TikTok. Other types of violence that was going on. And a lot of people are saying that the reason this was happening is that Hamas was not happy with Fatah deciding to possibly postpone the elections in the West Bank, that were supposed to happen. Or I'm not completely familiar with the facts right now, what's the status of these elections. But a lot of the reason of this was, disagreements between Hamas and Fatah. And, you would think that, the Hamas and Fatah are in this together. So yes, they are in this together in many ways, especially in fighting Israel and terrorism that's going on in the West Bank and in Israel. But in a lot of ways, there are tensions between them, and we don't necessarily hear what's going on, between the two, which is very interesting on I'd say a political perspective, but less on a military perspective.
I can add, by the way, we just got another official update from the IDF that according to 7 p.m. Israel time, which is 1 hour ago, the correct number of rockets is 4,340 missiles were shot at Israel, which is over 4,000, obviously. And just to understand the concept that they use these rockets because of lack of success in other fields. But Arjun, just to maybe mention, also from a military point of view, I know you don't live in Israel, but you have a lot of Israeli connections, I guess. Just to mention that we were, as an army, but also as a civil society, ready to another intifada because of the elections. There was a rumor that Israel as a government will kind of force the PLO and Abu Mazen to postpone the elections because we were afraid that Hamas will take over the West Bank as well. And it was just a rumor. And I can tell you that the IDF was more than ready towards the end of this year or the last quarter of this year for another intifada. So right now, another excuse or the linkage between the elections to the current silence from the PLO, it's very problematic, but you are right. Abu Mazen was very, very quiet. I'm not talking about condemning Hamas about firing rockets. I never expect that from him. But his being quiet actually brought the Israeli Arab politicians that were democratically elected to actually condemn Hamas and to tell Hamas, you're firing rockets toward Al-Quds, which is Jerusalem, and we are the public elected figures. Let us deal with the Israeli government. When it's trying to do this external effect or to bring everybody to shelters because of sirens and bombings, actually you are harming the situation more than you are helping. And this was the only Arab official statement by the Israeli politicians, Arab Israeli politicians. And when Abu Mazen gave his speech, it was actually kind of weak. It was kind of not really clear. It was blurry. It was all intentionally because he's in a very problematic situation. We're not in a political science class, but I'm just saying he's in a very much problematic situation right now within his community and his constituency, because first of all, he's old, he's not very well, health-wise, and he was very alarmed because of the Hamas strengthening before the elections. So that just to connect those dots together. I hope we answered your question, and with your permission, we'll move to another person. David, I saw you unmuted yourself, so you want to ask a question?
Free Palestine, you guys are all a bunch of fucking occupied motherfuckers. Stop.
Okay, so we had someone that joined that wanted to yell at us and say not nice things. So we muted him. So there's another question here, which is kind of related to our last question, that has to do with the situation that's going on in Israel and East Jerusalem in terms of the rioting that's going on in the streets. I don't think there's much to say here about this, other than, you know, I think a lot of the attacks against Jews by Palestinians, especially in East Jerusalem, are very much influenced or inspired both with what's happening in East Jerusalem, but also what's happening in Gaza. Okay, so they're interlinked. You know, it's for me, it's hard to say what causes the other, but they're definitely very much related in terms of extremism and you know, supporting terrorist causes and similar things like that. Omri, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you got it all right. Right now, unfortunately, maybe just to state it out there, I'm dealing with obviously the incitement that you see over the chat, and we need to kick some people out. I apologize for that. We decided to do it consciously open conversation to keep it respected and respectful, but unfortunately there's some people here. Let's not continue with this kind of engagement in the chat, because let's leave the chat for questions, and be more than happy to answer more questions if you have, please.
Yes, okay.
You know what, let me counter, thank you for the private message. I wouldn't conceal your name, but just to mention. Israel, I'm sorry even to mention and to laugh at the beginning because it's ridiculous. Israel and the IDF are not using chemical weapons against Gazian people or Arab people or any of our enemies. Never did and never will. And you can catch me 20 years or 30 or 50 years from now, and still it will be the same answer. Israel is not using unconventional weapons in a conventional warfare. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a terror organization, and we are using even more conventional warfare. There is no army in the world, and again, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the IDF, that did knock on the roof methodology, not at all. And Matan mentioned the AP reporters picturing from one block, their building is being shut down because they were able to understand that the IDF is going to bomb there. They got phones to their cell phone, direct cell phones. They got flyers, leaflets flying from the air, but also one missile which was not armed towards the roof to let them know that the building is coming down. So Israel is trying very hard, trust me. Also, I know it from within the IDF. Israel and the IDF is trying very hard not to harm any civilians and any uninvolved people. Please understand that, and I'm not saying it because I'm Israeli or a representative coming from the IDF as an officer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it from knowledge-based statement. Please understand that. Let's take another question. I see Myri, you unmuted yourself, so.
Yes, thanks Omri and Matan for giving us all these insights. I had a quick question, which is not exactly military related, but security related more generally. With regard to the riots of the sort, I mean, I believe we haven't seen this kind of Arab-Israeli riots within Israel proper since October 2000, right? So my question is, why do you, I mean, I understand that the Arab sector has issues in terms of funding and being under-policed, etc. I understand those, but do you think there were any specific reasons why the Arab sector erupted, or we had this riots on this scale this particular time? Like, were there any factors that were specific to this round of fighting, apart from the general issues of Arab communities being under police, crime, etc., that sort of thing? Also, was there Hamas incitement in the Arab sector? I don't know. This is, I mean, it's not a rhetorical question; it's an open question. Is that something that was there? So yes, so those two questions, specific factors that may have been related to this round of fighting, and was Hamas inciting the Arabs within Israel to rise up and to go on riots? Thank you.
Sure. So I think that I have a complicated answer to this, okay? Because to be honest, I don't know if I can give you. I don't think there's one answer. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, for me as an Israeli, it's hard for me to take apart the war that's going on now in Gaza, what was going on in East Jerusalem, and what was going on for the past almost month before any of the things that happened in Jerusalem and in the West, and also in Gaza were going on. There was a lot of violence going on in the streets, especially in the West Bank, but also in East Jerusalem. In Israel, it was called like the TikTok uprising, or it had some other weird names, but there was violence going on in the street. Now, this was very much, happening for, extreme Islamic fundamental reasons, the same way Hamas does and has in Gaza. I don't necessarily know if it was Hamas inspired, but there was terrorism going on in Israel before this whole situation happened, okay? Then there was started rioting in East Jerusalem, okay? And then when the Israeli police got involved in trying to stop this rioting in East Jerusalem, which was also fueled, according to the Palestinians, what was happening in Sheikh Jarrah. So putting all this together, something happened. If you ask me, you can find many reasons why to attack Israelis or why to attack Jews in the streets and stab them or shoot at them. At the end of the day, this is plain and simple terrorism. It doesn't matter if it's from Hamas. It doesn't matter if it's from, Fatah, or just from some other mosque or other place in the West Bank that was inciting against Jews. Saying that, I do think that at a certain point, when the heavy riots started in main Israel, in Lod and in other places, it was definitely inspired by Hamas and by what was happening in Gaza. And if you look at television, they asked them, why are you doing this? Why are you attacking Israelis? Why are you attacking Jews? He said, it's because of Jerusalem, it's because of Gaza, it's because of any other ideology for them to kill Israel. So I think it's a complicated answer. I think most Arab Israelis did not take part in this violence. I think that's important to say. It was a minority that was a very violent minority, but most Arab Israelis were not involved. Not to say that they didn't support this, but they weren't involved. So, we can try to look at other factors that I'm sure were part of this, but it's only part of the big picture, I guess.
Thank you.
Great questions from Viraj.
Please.
First question, where does Hamas get funding for building the rockets and tunnels? I'll address that in a second. And the second question is, given that civilians are okay with Hamas building tunnels under hospitals, they must be enjoying popular support. Why do you think that is so? Okay, so I'll start with the first question, and is a very important question. Where does Hamas get funding for building the rockets and tunnels? Okay, so since, I'm actually not sure from what exact year, but for several years now, Hamas has been receiving international support, especially from Qatar, okay, who is funding Gaza every month by, I'm not sure of the exact number, if it's $50 million every month, but it's a very, very large amount of money that is supposed to go to Gaza to help pay pay slips, so people can buy food and for humanitarian causes in Gaza. Now, what we've seen is absolutely ridiculous, is that Hamas is obviously using a lot of its funding from overseas that's supposed to go to the Gaza people to building hospitals, to building schools, to building streets, to build sewage systems, everything that has to do with bettering the life of the Gazans who live there. And instead, they're using this money to build rockets, pay Hamas soldiers, build tunnels, build bunkers, create weapon systems that are aimed at shooting Israel. And, that causes me to think, like, why would they do this? Why would they use this money that's supposed to go to the Gaza people, and instead they're using it to buy weapons to try to destroy Israel? So this is one thought regarding this answer, which I think is very disturbing. And the second question is, I'm not sure of the answer. Why, given they're building in residential buildings, why are they enjoying popular support? So, first of all, it's really impossible to know how much popular support they're receiving, okay? At the end of the day, according to different surveys, there's a very famous Palestinian surveyor named Shkaki, who actually surveyed that the majority of Gazans support Fatah and not support Hamas, okay? Saying that on the streets, if you look at rallies, you'd think that Hamas is the majority. But I think a lot of people in Gaza are afraid, very scared from Hamas for the way it terrorized the Gaza people. It is very vicious. It is very, very strong militarily. And so it's really hard to know if they're really receiving the support. And, I'm a father. I have 3 children. I'm a civilian in my daily life. And, it's hard for me to believe that most Gazans support what Hamas is doing. All they're doing is bringing destruction on their people, destroying the lives of people. So many Gazans are either wounded or dead just because Hamas has this extreme ideology wanting to kill Israel. So I hope that one day the people in Gaza realize what Hamas is doing to them, and they have the courage to stand up to them and try to overthrow them. And maybe there'll be some forces in Gaza that instead of Hamas forces, there'll be peaceful forces. That's, I think, what most Israelis would want.
I would also mention, by the way, I don't think there is a massive support of Hamas in Gaza. We need to remember that Hamas has been extremely hard also on its own citizens or its own rulers in general. Let's talk about a civil engagement recently. COVID, Corona. Remember, it was a thing once, a few years ago. Kidding, of course. But let's discuss this for a second. Hamas is the ruler in Gaza. Israel donated, by the way, free vaccinations to Gazan people through Erez border crossing. It went to Hamas, but because Israel donated the vaccinations and not money, it was banned by Hamas for use. This is why they waited for donations, also in kind, like in vaccinations from the Russian government. Most of the Gazan people who were vaccinated on COVID used the Sputnik vaccination, not the Pfizer or Moderna or other West world vaccinations. I'm not saying either or each one is good or better or worse. I'm just saying it is what it is. And we need also to remember that Hamas control the power in the Gaza Strip, but also control the funding that's incoming to the Gaza Strip. We know about the Qatar donations, the millions of dollars that actually Israel is facilitating towards the Hamas government. And there was some op-ed published a few hours ago that basically claimed that 70% of the income that's arriving to Gaza is going directly to Hamas, and only 30% towards the welfare of its citizens. So that's something to take into account. And there is 2 questions regarding that. When you ask yourself about the rockets, we mentioned 4,000 fired towards Israel, it had to come from somewhere. I'm not one of the people that that believe in the conspiracy that Iran control the entire anti-Israel movement around the world. I'm not one of those, but we know Iran is highly involved. We need also to understand that Khaled Mashal, which is one of the leaders of Hamas, actually is head of the fundraising arm, sits outside of Gaza. He's a millionaire. He sits on tons of money. He's bringing a lot of money from outside Gaza into Gaza. He's also taking some for his own pocket, but this is another call. But in general, there's something to take into account, that Hamas, if he really cared about the citizens, we needed to hear more vaccinations on COVID. If he really cared about the citizens, he wouldn't build a metro of attacking and terror tunnels beneath his big cities. He would invest his billions of dollars invested in terror, in other causes, civil, welfare, health. There's a lot of things Hamas can invest in its own people to promote the Gaza Strip to be more welfared or area for people to be a little bit more happy to live. We need also to remember people who lived in Gaza and were burned there don't have a lot of options to live, unfortunately to say, to live or to live abroad. Obviously, there is a lot of Gazan people that study abroad and live abroad, but for the last person in the city of Gaza who was born during I don't know, the past 20 years, there's not a lot of options for them, unfortunately, because of Hamas, not because of Israel. Israel is actually being very much promoting that. I want to address another question that was sent to me privately. Thanks for all of you, by the way, who sending me your emails. I will send you my information afterwards. I will share with you all the information you need, and I hope to assist your efforts. Yes, we're going to share the recording as well, so don't worry about it. What will make Hamas to stop firing, and how many missiles Iron Dome intercepted, according to the recent number of 4,340 rockets were fired? So the official numbers from Israel stated that 1/3 of those were intercepted by Iron Dome. Another third fell actually in the Gaza Strip. Another fact needs to be said here. Right now, half of the Gaza Strip or Gazan people don't have electricity because of Hamas rockets fell on lines that coming from Ashkelon power plant, which is an Israeli obviously territory. Israel, by the way, donating or giving the Gazan people electricity. We can claim it's not enough. You can claim a lot about it, but the fact is that Israel is bringing electricity to Gaza through Ashkelon, and 1/3 of the rockets of Hamas fell in Gaza, and some of those actually harmed the electricity cables that right now, unfortunately, Israeli forces, but Israeli civil electricity company employees cannot enter to fix, because Hamas is still firing and targeting Israeli civilians and IDF soldiers. And just to reclaim what Matan said earlier, I don't know if you saw some pictures. Israeli, by the way, traditionally is not publishing the pictures of the thousands. I'm right about the number. Over 1,000 trucks that coming in every day through the borders of Erez and Kerem Shalom down south. Erez is up north in the Gaza Strip, and Kerem Shalom. Thousands of trucks bringing supplies, humanitarian aid, civil, and also fuel into the Gaza Strip. Some of those trucks are donated by Egypt or by Qatar or whatever, but most of them are Israelis that sell products to Gaza Strip actually in Lost, and also donating a lot of fuel for the welfare of the Gazian people. So when Matan mentioned that 3 soldiers were injured, it was firing mortar bombs towards this humanitarian aid. So when people claim that Israel is not doing anything humanitarian to assist the Gazian people, it's because we're not publishing it officially. So not here in this unofficial conversation, I can tell you that, and you can check what I'm saying, and that's just fact. So just to take it into account, that instead of countering the why Israel has a success with Iron Dome, or thanks to the new border down south, We need to understand why Hamas is firing 4,300 missiles towards the Israeli government or the Israeli civilians, civil society, instead of investing those in its own people. There's a long question here.
I think we'll take Andrew's question first, and then we'll go to that question.
Yeah.
So Andrew is asking, I heard that Hamas has Fajr 5 missiles that can go under the Iron Dome. Is that true? And why haven't more hit and done damage? And I think Aparna also asked the question, how are weapons and the raw materials for rockets, etc., physically moved into Gaza? So those are two great questions that are related. So first of all, I'm not completely familiar with the names of the different rockets. What I can say is that over the years, Hamas was able to make huge technological advancements in their rocket technology. In 2009, I was in Operation Gaza Strip, where my team, I was a team leader, team commander in this operation, an operation called Katzman, where we found rockets that were pretty basic. You know, they were homemade. They were made in these kind of labs that were pretty simple. You know, they didn't do a lot of destruction, and you know, it caused a lot of terror, but they were pretty simple. But over the years, especially using technology that they get from Hezbollah, but mainly from Iran, they've been able to create and build very, very strong rockets that hit almost every part in Israel. They shot rockets at Jerusalem from the Gaza Strip. They shot rockets nearby where I grew up. It's in kind of the middle near the city of Netanya. I didn't mention this, but 3 days ago, a rocket landed in Givat Shmuel in my street where I live, probably 50 meters from my home, that caused a lot of destruction. It's a town right out of Tel Aviv, literally like 50 to 70 meters from my building. So the rockets are very, very advanced. And when they do hit, they do a lot of destruction. I'm not sure the exact figures, but I know there are at least 9 or 10 civilians that were killed until now in Israel, not to mention the many people that were injured from these rockets. And the question is also, what about Iron Dome? How does it not intercept all the rockets? Look, Iron Dome is an absolute miracle. Like, there's no other way to say this. It's a technology that's mind-boggling. You know, it's a rocket that is launched and hits another rocket. But saying that this is a miraculous technology, it's not perfect. It only hits about 90% of the rockets that are shot at Israel. Approximately 10% are missed. This is mainly because sometimes the barrages of rockets are so large, so many rockets are fired at once at one place, that there aren't enough Iron Dome missiles to shoot at all the rockets. So it's not even of a question of the Iron Dome missing. Sometimes there are just too many rockets. And you know, Israel doesn't have a limitless amount of Iron Dome projectiles. So this is one part of the question, and people should understand. And it's a very important point. The fact that Israel has Iron Dome saves a lot of lives, but it is not perfect, and a lot of Israelis are still hit and harmed. And I think the most important part, and this is very crucial to understand, that Iron Dome saves Palestinians' lives all the time. And I know this sounds bad, but I cannot imagine what the situation would be in Israel right now and how this military conflict would look like if Israel didn't have Iron Dome stopping 90% of the rockets. The military operation that Israel would have to conduct in the Gaza Strip to stop all these rockets without Iron Dome would be detrimental to Hamas and unfortunately to the people of Gaza. So this is a very important part of what's going on. And the second question, do you want to answer the second question, Omri, or do you want me to? How are the raw weapons moved into Israel?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we talked earlier about humanitarian aid that's going into Israel. So till this day, most of the things that come into Gaza for daily lives, for everything you can think of, goes through border crossings from Israel. Okay. Now, Israel has a way and a process to make sure that weapons don't enter Gaza. But what sometimes a lot of people don't understand, that a lot of these products are dual-use products. Okay. When Israel allows cement to enter the Gaza Strip to build a school or asphalt to build roads, it cannot make sure that Hamas doesn't take these materials and build tunnels with cement. And we've seen miles and miles of tunnels built from these kind of cement. And when Israel allows metal materials to enter Gaza for construction, mainly for construction, but also for other use, for industrial use, a lot of this metal is going straight to building rockets. And I'll just like to give you one short example. In 2009, I mentioned this earlier, we found rockets. Now, in this place where we found rockets, this is really crazy. There was a small rocket factory that we found. This rocket factory was inside a residential home in Gaza. And what we found there was metal rods to create the rockets. We found manuals in Arabic how to create the rockets. But what a lot of people don't understand is that we found fertilizer bags. Now, what was crazy is that these fertilizer bags had writing in Hebrew, that they were made in Haifa in Israel. This is all fertilizers that entered the Gaza Strip before 2009 for agriculture use, okay? And Hamas was using these fertilizers to create explosives, which is insane. It's absolutely insane. Instead of using this to grow strawberries, they were using this to build rockets. Yeah, so a lot of these materials enter for the people of Gaza, but they're used by Hamas.
Yeah, politely, Jalik, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You want to ask your question? I see you raising your hand.
Yes, Omri, thank you so much for having this opportunity. I'm basically familiar with most of the content that you are providing during this brief. However, I'm more interested in current operational activities of the IDF, and also the situation as it is at the moment, knowing that there might be a ceasefire on the way starting from tomorrow morning. So what I'm more interested in is, do you think that the IDF had sufficiently degraded Hamas capability that a ceasefire would last? And I would like to hear your perspective on this, based on your operational experience and the point of the position that you're at. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. We need also maybe to remind all of us that this is an unofficial briefing. We are reserved officers, and I'll be more than happy to give you our point of view, and specifically mine as unfortunately operationalized officers in the combat unit. So I will tell you, first of all, yes and yes. I think the IDF threw Hamas in the heart and the bases that it hurt them the most. We need to understand, when the IDF is publishing information about attacking overnight over 500 causes within the Gaza Strip, and most of them are Hamas affiliated places, it definitely doing something to Hamas. But I can tell you that a few hours ago, but also from yesterday, IDF published officially, the spokesperson, this is not secret news here, published videos of special unit and special arming devices that basically harmed strategical weapons that concealed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. These strategic weapons, some of you wrote Fajr 5, some of you wrote the missiles was kind of preventing Iron Dome from intercepting them. So those are strategical weapons that holds, I forgot, I think the term in English, but that holds a war head that basically needs to harm Israeli settlements and to land in IDF bases, but also in the center, in the heart of Israeli places that civilians live. So those missiles were eliminated by the IDF, also by airstrikes, but also by special forces specifically. And it was published by the IDF. So that's something that Hamas will take a long time to re-achieve. That's first. Second, and it was mentioned here before, the metro and the destruction of the tunnels, the Hamas tunnels. Not all tunnels, by the way, are trying to be cross borders. Without giving too much information, there is no cross border ability right now to Hamas because of Israel defense abilities. So they're using the tunnels basically to avoid aerial vision, that the IDF UAVs and planes will not picture them and harm them. So they're using this metro of tunnels underneath Gazian cities, especially the city of Gaza. And Israel struck those tunnels very hard. It was also, again, published a few days ago already, the roads and buildings that actually crashed or because of Israel destroying these tunnels. So when a tunnel is struck beneath the ground, when it's crashing into itself, everything above is also crashing to inside of the tunnel. Israel also did several big operations, also using the media, but also struck specifically Hamas, specific unit and special unit of the maritime unit, but also the underground unit, which is considered to be a special force by Hamas, called the Nukhba. Most of the Nukhba unit were eliminated in the past days. And you need to understand, when an army loses a special force unit, or even if it's just I would say a declarative name, a special force unit, it's a big hit for a military or a terror organization. That's second. Third, we need also to understand that most of the high-ranked officials and high-ranked officers of Hamas army brigades, but also the political arm, are being hunted or being killed. So that's something to take into account. Think about your country, but I can tell you from the state of Israel that if our policymakers or decision makers in the army were hunted, it basically means that the military cannot operate. Obviously, the last operative on the ground on this post can shoot his weapon, but I mean strategically, they cannot operate. So those three aspects need to definitely take and consider to take into account when we think about Hamas abilities or reestablishing his abilities in the nearest future. That's first. And secondly, I can tell you that in perspectives of also civil engagement, it will be extremely hard for Hamas to re-engage itself, first of all, or to be reactive in the upcoming years. When I'm talking about years, it's hard to consider the last conflict as a protective edge. We need to remember that in the past 3 years, we had 5 different rounds of escalation, of firing rockets toward Israeli settlements around the Gaza Strip, but not only, in Israeli planes or Israeli Air Force and military attacked Hamas posts in around of Gaza. And this is the 5th time in the past 3 years. So when compared to protective edge, when the ground forces entered Gaza, obviously it's a different question, a different level. But if you ask me personally, and Matan, of course, I'll be more than happy to hear your thoughts, Hamas will not be able to reestablish itself in the Gaza Strip as it was. Obviously, he lost a lot of rockets. He fired most of them, but the rest, strategic weapons, directly were destroyed by the IDF. His heads cannot really raise their head, literally speaking. And thirdly, he needs to invest a lot to reassure to his civilians their security in their point of view. But Israel needs also to support that effort, I mean, the civil effort to support the Gazian people. So I hope I answered your question. Matan, you have some input on those
Yes,
things?
I'll try to share my thoughts shortly on this. So first of all, I'll start with what I think what is not an operational success for the IDF, and Omri mentioned this, is that the IDF was not able to successfully target Hamas terrorist leaders. They're hiding in the bunkers. They know not to leave, and except mid-level leaders that were hit, it was not successful in hitting, the big guns. Saying that, I think every operational plan that Hamas had since the 2014 war that it expected to carry out against Israel in this war failed. It was not able to bring its forces into Israel. Its attacks from drones mostly failed. Very few successes with hitting IDF forces with anti-tank missiles. There were some successes, but very small, okay? They were attacking from sea, Israeli gas, I forgot the word in English, natural gas facilities off the shore of Israel, okay? So on an operational level, Hamas failed and Israel succeeded. And I think that Israel knew what to target really good in terms of their infrastructure, in terms of their operational efforts, less hitting rockets. They weren't that successful in hitting rockets, but more in the tunnels, operational systems, Hamas intelligence, and those kind of things. I hope that answered. I think we have time for one more question. Direct messages, because otherwise
let's see. No, I thank for all of you, by the way, for sending me the messages with your email. As promised, I will send all of you. And among the private messages, some of you already suggested to open a WhatsApp group, so I can send you the tons of material and the fact sheets that I received. I'd be more than happy to share with you. It's just more easier on WhatsApp. It's easier also to share because email is limited. I'll be more than happy to share with all of you. I will email each and every one of you afterwards, promise.
I'd also like to thank you all very much for joining us. It was, I think, a very interesting event, getting your questions, some of which, were questions from, I guess, different backgrounds and different views, which is very important for us to hear all the voices. I'd like to also have you all follow My Truth, both our Facebook pages in Hebrew and in English. And, you can find both me and Omri on Facebook and on Twitter, I think. And you can feel more than free to contact us on any question you may have on really on anything that's going on in Israel, and specifically this, that has to do with the war that's going on right now. So again, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us and you're giving us your time. And we hope to see you in next events, but not in next wars.
Yeah. I also shared my email, my private email. So if you want to send me something directly, please feel free to do so. If you want Matan, I can share it with you. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. So if you need anything further, please feel free. And thank you again, all of you, to join. We hope to be in touch in a more positive manner soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.